Hello, I'm Hrant Mikaelian with the Groong podcast, and this is day 8 of the blockade of Artsakh by Azerbaijan, resulting in 120,000 people effectively being held hostage by the regime in Baku. During this crisis situation, Groong and 168 Hours are teaming up to provide more English language content and analysis on this very serious humanitarian crisis. We're all in this together, and we're doing this for the benefit of an informed Armenian public. For those of you who aren't aware of Groong, I would like to ask you to visit our website, podcasts.groong.org, and learn more and subscribe. And if you're watching this on YouTube, the link will be in the description. Thank you very much. Our guest today is Hrant Mikaelian, a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher based in Yerevan. He's also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. Hello and welcome, Hrant.
Hello, thank you.
Let's begin with a little bit more background on news, what happened over the weekend. Late last week, even after resorting to the step of disrupting the flow of gas that goes through a pipeline from Yerevan to Stepanakert, the gas was restored after a few days, and State Minister Ruben Vartanyan indicated that the transportation blockade could be lifted, but we are here on Monday late afternoon and no news on that yet. The land corridor is the only way that people can move to and from Artsakh. There is no air corridor, and thus the free movement of people and their rights, their human right of free movement, is prevented. Stepanakert also has an airport which could be used to airlift supplies and people, but Azerbaijan has threatened to shoot down any airplane that goes in that direction. And some more factoids. So as we said, 120,000 people are collectively held hostage. Out of those, 30,000 children, 20,000 elderly, and 9,000 disabled. 350 people who have disabilities and health issues and need treatment in Yerevan cannot get to Yerevan. 11 people are in intensive care in Stepanakert, and out of those, 10 children. 4 of the ICU patients are in critical condition. Food and supplies are running out. Emergency medical supplies, including infant formula, are not to be found in drugstores. Hrant, anything else I missed from the situation that is unraveling right now?
Well, if we are talking about facts, I think you've mentioned all the facts which are important here. If we are trying to analyze that, I think we can try to go deeper into that. I'm sure most of what I can say is obvious, but I hope I'll add up something to the existing discussion. So let's see. But generally, what we see is that Aliyev does what he does. Many try to understand what is the real reason and so on, but the main reason is that just because he can. Because he can face no consequences after doing so. So if there is no practical limitation on that, or political limitation, that becomes another tool of him, pushing on Artsakh population, on Armenia, on Russians, and on international community as well, because we see that international community does not put any sanctions on him, rather they try to please him somehow. So this is also a reality in which we live. This is overall landscape, and if you have more question, I'll try to elaborate.
Well, we ask all of our guests, and yesterday I asked our guests, like, why now? We were hearing that compromises related to the status of Artsakh all throughout these discussions related to changes in the placement of the corridor and abrupt changes, in fact, kicking people out of their villages, were all done so that we wouldn't have to give a corridor through Zangezur to Azerbaijan. I don't know where they got that idea from, but we have been that was the official reason. But now we're seeing that effectively the Lachin or Berdzor corridor is blocked, and there are still threats looming in the air about Zangezur. What can you tell us about the political aims of the regime in Baku?
Well, one of primary aims would be, of course, achieving short-term goals, like including pushing up for so-called peace talk, which would be beneficial for Baku, because we've seen that the talks which were in September, October have interrupted, but also by Baku's decisions, but not only, because we've seen that Brussels and Washington dialogue was interrupted because of Moscow and Tehran reaction. But that's not the only reason, of course. Of course, Baku wants corridor, and they want extraterritorial corridor. And what they name corridor and what many understand as a corridor in Armenia are different things, because they want several lines of transportation.
Yeah, multimodal.
And probably 2 or 3 lines.
Okay.
At least 2 roads, automobile roads, and 1 probably the railroad. So they want, effectively, that's why they are talking about Zangezur corridor, because they perceive whole Syunik as a corridor for them. So this is why they are pushing for that, and this is why Armenian government is not agreeing on that. But that's also not the only reason. Of course, the main and ultimate goal is pushing Artsakh population out of Artsakh. This is obvious. This policy is aiming that as well. And of course, they are trying to gain momentum, because Russia is now troubling in Ukraine, and it's also obvious that Russia is unable to react adequately. And for example, I had an occasion when Russian journalists were asking for an interview. They took an interview and then did not publish it, because in state media they don't want to talk about this anymore, because this shows obvious Russia's weakness. So this is also another point. So there are many short-term goals, but the long-term, I would say, that is pushing Artsakh population out of Artsakh. And this is why, for example, Aliyev is always understating the number of population in Artsakh, because if he would be at least to some point honest when he is saying that they are Azerbaijani citizens, he would, the very same way he would exaggerate their number as he does with the general Azerbaijani population, which is, let me remember, according to my calculation, is about 6.6 million people instead of 10.2 as they state officially. Now, instead he says there are 20,000 Armenians in Artsakh, which is by 100,000 or 6 times less than in reality. So of course this is another goal of Aliyev, but also he wants to show Armenia its weakness. He wants to confront Armenia and Artsakh, and in a way it works also because of some political groups which exist in Armenia, because of some narratives on which he is playing. And there are some people who are saying Armenia should be thankful to Artsakh should be thankful to Armenia because of the gas and because of everything. And I don't know how, for example, Aragatsotn should be thankful to, I don't know, Armavir. Artsakh is Armenia, of course, not Republic of Armenia, but this contradiction is already Azerbaijani paradigm. And unfortunately there are people who are in Armenia like that, who don't understand or who buy this propaganda, and unfortunately this works.
And unfortunately, I have to say, I noticed more of this propaganda directly on state media, whereas previously it was relegated to obscure, maybe even the newspapers owned by the de facto regime in Armenia, but it is now actually openly being spread on state media.
Right.
So let me. So today it's Monday, and Armenia had applied last week to the European Court of Human Rights and seeking an interim measure, in other words, an injunction against Azerbaijan, basically demanding the unblocking of the corridor. The ECHR had given Azerbaijan until today, 4 p.m. Central European time, and that expires, I think in a few hours. So far, there is no indication that even this deadline will make Azerbaijan move. But we all know that even if they somehow do unblock the corridor, they will either extract more concessions from the Armenian side, and there is no guarantee that they will not resort to this tactic again, like in a week from now. So another interesting thing that happened over the weekend was EU's Ursula von der Leyen was in Baku, and they were celebrating an agreement to supply electricity from Azerbaijan to Europe via an undersea cable. As expected, none of them mentioned this current situation in Artsakh. It's as if these people don't exist, we, as a result, we have 100,000 or more people locked up. So, what conclusions can you draw from EU's silence on this matter, even in this sort of obviously dire situation that Artsakh is in?
Yeah. One more thing to add to the previous issue concerning the tactics is also a seasonal factor, because when it's warm or hot, Azerbaijan uses this time to attack militarily, and in the winter they usually try to use some hybrid tactics like this one, because it's not best time to attack militarily. So it's continuation of the same policy, but with a different means. So in fact, this blockade is a continuation of war, of military attacks, but just with a different means. That's obvious. Concerning EU leadership's position, I can say several things. One is that unfortunately in modern world the national minority rights and generally rights of peoples are not protected well, and there are some reasons to that, but this is the fact. And there are some groups which in today's world are very well protected. There are some groups which in today's world are very badly protected, and there are some ethnic groups to which you can find an attention. For example, the UN General Assembly voted for the right to self-determination of Palestinian people, but they do not do the same for the Artsakh people, mainly because of political interests, not just because Palestinian people deserve their homeland more than Artsakh people. Yeah, because some say, for example, Aliyev says Armenians already have a state. Okay, Arabs also have a state, and not even one.
Yes.
But there are people who live there, and they still need some self-governance. And the same refers to Artsakh. Now, Azerbaijan rejects this right at all. Of course, number of Artsakhis is not as big, and Armenians generally. And this is one trouble, because Palestinian issue is being heard also because of the number of people who lives in Palestine and also who left Palestine. And Artsakhis are fewer in number, and unfortunately in modern world this number matters. But not only that, also to which extent are you ready to get used to this situation, or you might be you might try to be a comfortable, let's say, vis-a-vis for your partners, or might not try to be. Yeah. We see that vocal minorities, the more they are aggressive or active, the more success they gain. So this also reflects our mistakes, mistakes of Armenians who try to appeal to different instances. Of course, this is needed to do, and this is also done not in the best way, but still I think we need to find another way of ways of mobilization, not just to expect that someone will come and grant us with whatever we need, but the more important, the EU side of this story is also one more thing. The position that there have been many politicians in European Union who have been called pragmatic, or let's say put in first tier, who have been dealing with Russia, and they have been saying that look, we have some interests there, economic interests, energy interests, so we need to cooperate. They have been cooperating, and these people are now being harshly criticized because they have put aside, let's say, humanitarian issues and pushed on a pragmatism. Of course, Russia, even despite these military actions against Ukraine, still by far not as aggressive as Azerbaijan and Turkey. Turkey is starting every new attack like every year or so. Azerbaijan is doing more or less the same. But still, of course, this position, this view is being condemned because Russia attacked Ukraine. Also, I've heard in the media discussions the issue that Russians attacked Georgia and no one took care, and that's why they attacked Ukraine. In reality, let's see that Georgian case was a unique case, let's say single case, which have been then debated in EU, the Tagliavini Commission and so on. But going to the initial reasons for example, Russian attack, we could also see that the full state-led attack in European region, which took place in 2020 against Artsakh and Armenia by Azerbaijan and Turkey, was a case. For Russians, not the 2008, which was at that time and afterwards as well considered an exclusive case. But this one, the 2020 attack, was a model case because no one condemned it. It was a case when the military solution worked. Initially, many adequate international actors were stating that military solution will not work here, but it worked. And from 2020 and on, many actors in the world, they see that you can attack someone and you can handle the consequences. And it might even turn out that it's not the same in Russian case, but we see that it's political, not it's not about principle, unfortunately. So if it's not Russia, if it's let's say Saudi Arabia or Turkey or someone else, that might work out. And the fact that attack against Artsakh was not condemned, I think this is a major contributor to current turmoil in the world affairs. Yeah,
and the final Helsinki Declaration, obviously we need to mention that for many years was the cornerstone of the negotiation process, the Minsk negotiation process. There are three major principles. Non-use of force is one of them, self-determination is one of them, and territorial integrity is one of them. And the goal was to find a solution that satisfies all three of those principles, but Azerbaijan was basically able to nullify two of those principles, and there are some states, the UK for instance, which even I think at the time congratulated. Ironically, Ukraine congratulated Azerbaijan on its victory, and sadly, we see the destruction that's going on in the UK, as you mentioned. But what happens outside of borders of Armenia is less in our control, obviously, and what happens inside, I wanted to talk about that. So as a reminder, Artsakh Beglarian, former human rights ombudsman of Artsakh, currently he's the acting deputy state minister, is conducting a sit-in in front of the United Nations. This is the first time that even I think the country rep decided to come outside and meet with Beglarian because they have a strict policy of not talking to Artsakh because of some dictate from Baku, and basically their explanation is that we will send this information to New York, and but we cannot deal with the issue of Artsakh for whatever reason. And in fact, Hrant, I ran into you at one of I think it was over the weekend at the protest, and I think you would agree that the turnout of the protest was not that great. So my question is, it really sort of irritates me that, given that recent polls indicate that more than 90% of Armenians in Armenia are against Artsakh being part of Azerbaijan for obvious reasons, even if just for human rights reasons, but how do you explain the apathy and lack of physical engagement from the wider Armenian population? Why weren't there 100,000 people in front of the UN, for instance, supporting Artsakh Beglarian?
Well, let's say my observations during last period of time shows that in reality people's action is highly dependent on what they perceive as a social norm, and these social norms are not the norms by the wider population, especially in the current informational situation, but the norm of dictated by the government. And now, if we look,
how is it dictated by through the media? Do you mean, or?
Yeah, through media first of all. But why I'm saying government, not media? Because the media, which is not protected and supported by the government, is being punished for what they say, or being excluded by some methods, using some methods. But those which are state supported, they get let's say a bigger coverage, and also of course it depends on the extent of coverage, on the emotion of the coverage, but generally people were there, people were in the Republican Square, they came to celebrate New Year or something, and there are lots of decorations, so it's no hardness to go to the UN house there.
Yeah, it's like 50 meters from the
50
Republic
meters
Square.
away. The issue is that they think this is not only not supported by the government, but it's in a way against the government's will, so they can be somehow punished, and that's why first of all they don't get this emotion that they should act, which comes usually from the government, and instead they get the emotion that if they act, this might be somewhat bad. So I think this is main reason, and what is being propagated by the government is just chill.
Yeah,
and that's what they do, especially if we take into account that getting chill is much easier always. So
yeah, there's a lot of distractions for you to, you know.
Yeah. But to be frank, I want to harden this statement I've made by one comparison. In mid 40s or in early 40s in Paris, you would not see what you would expect during German occupation or during Vichy regime. You would see that everything is okay, that majority is celebrating, that life is okay, cafes are full, and so on. Just small minority was combating, and to even bolden that, I will say that of course French were combating, but if not Soviet Union and United States, most probably they would not be able to overthrow the German rule themselves. So in a way we face Turkish Azerbaijani rule here through these government sections, because first of all what we see by the statements of this government is always unilateral justification of whatever Azerbaijan does, always, and always they say, oh, we can do nothing. So extent of support of the idea of Artsakh being governed by Azerbaijan is growing. You said more than 90% is against. I completely agree, but previously we would have like 99.9% against, and now we have like 92 or 93% against. It's still a vast majority, but it's much less. And if we see that when, let's say, 100 people are against something very primitive or regarding their personal income and so on, and they can get to the streets, and when we see the issue where 90+% share the same value or idea and they do not gather to the street, so we see that there are some factors which do not let them to do so. It's hard to push all this into several state sentences. Moreover, I'm not sure I understand this mechanism completely, which does not let people to go out. But again, the issue is there, and we should be very careful about it.
And just as an example, for instance, we could put aside the criticism of the government that its diplomatic failures led to the beginning of the war. We could put aside the criticism that the performance in the war was horrible. We could criticize even sort of the performance of the current government after the November 9-10 agreement and all the steps that or missteps that they have done. But like this is a basic sort of example, right? You have the same government, for instance, applied in the EU for this interim measure. So from one side, it is indicating that it still cares about the fate of Artsakh, but you know, if it just did a few more sort of programs on TV covering the UN, the sit-in and so forth, I'm sure more people would come. So it just baffles me why it wouldn't even go to that. And what you're saying is troubling, but it does make sense that basically this is somehow you know, deemed as an occupational regime. Meanwhile, the government, like, you know, just I think yesterday there was a public discussion, and we're seeing more faces from this small, very small fringe opposition groups that preach enmity to Russia. They explicitly, like, you know, for the first time, I think they used words like Putin attacked Russia, and they say that Russia is our enemy. Meanwhile, we know what will happen to the Armenians of Artsakh, and maybe even Armenia itself if the Russian military force is not here. I guess I was going to ask what the intention of the Armenian government is, but I think you answered that for me. So I don't know, do you have anything else to add, and how healthy-minded people should approach this? Because it's very difficult, I guess, to sort of both work and, you know, to try to do your daily job, but also sort of live in this environment of occupation. And how do you get a consensus of, you know, making change, or how do you sort of force this consensus upon the government as much as we can?
Well, let me start from Russia. I'll try to say a couple of words on that. Of course, Russia is also responsible on what happens in Artsakh, as well as Armenian government, because Russia also has an obligation. But obviously, pointing only on Russia, but not on Armenian government, is not right, because Armenian government has formal obligation for Artsakh. Now, concerning Russia, also, since it's not only the judicial issue, but also a political issue, it's also a matter of consensus between the sides. And Azerbaijani side works very intensively with Russians, I mean diplomatically, and not only that. But Armenian side doesn't do anything at all. Rather, they limit themselves with formal statements that why Russia does not support Armenia. Well, that would be nice if they would support Armenia publicly, but that's not the solution, because we have some statements. The best statements you can read from Greek side. They completely support Armenian struggle, but what can they do? So what we need is not exactly the statements. Now, concerning internal situation, of course, comparing this to Vichy regime, we should understand that it's a very mild example, but again, but not non-existent violence here, because we have political prisoners, some of them released, some of them still in prisons. We have these hacker attacks widespread. We have mass surveillance, and if we try to get the numbers, we will find out that it's really big in scale. Yeah. I mean, comparable to the population size and so on. So in reality, it's of course very, very far, extremely far from what you would say in healthy situation you would describe as democracy. Mm-hmm. And in none of democracies you can have constitutional majority of one power in the parliament. But let's put that aside, and let's try to figure out what ordinary people can do. I think again, ordinary people should unite, should get more knowledge about politics, and should understand that overall they have no other choice but to fight for their country and to create new civic activities. And in reality, we see some cases like that which are rather successful. So if there are more, I think we have chances, because as of today, Armenian interests are not represented on political level, but if on the civil society level, not those which are paid by the foreign countries, but those which are real grassroots civil society, if they unite, if people unite in such groups, in such activist societies, that might make sense, because ultimately many people would expect that political groups will do their job, that political parties will do their job. We see they failed. Generally that would be expectable, but still now we see that as a result. So it's not that there are some people who are responsible for that and we are not. So if we realize that power is in our hands, it might not be, but if we believe in that, we might gather it. Yeah. Why I'm saying so? It's also because powerlessness, yes.
It's like apathy.
That's also inherited from the Soviet Union, because in the Soviet Union, many would be afraid of government, and that's why they would be afraid of any public activity. And this is inherited by our population as of today as well. And now we should understand that modern technologies give us more power. Yeah. So we should learn new ways to utilize this power, even despite there are many people, many powerful people who do not want us to do so.
Hrant, you mentioned the case of hacker attacks, and I do want to brief our audience that there has been a spate of nation-state sponsored attacks, or at least notifications from companies like Apple and Google that opposition members, media personalities, and even government members, sort of low-ranking government members, are under attack. And I believe one of your even team members, you're part of the Armenian project, as we all know, and I believe several, or at least one person from your team was also targeted. I guess that what you're saying basically, and actually to cite an information security expert, Samvel Martirosyan, who recently talked about Pegasus, he said that he personally knows more than 100 people who have been targeted. I guess that's part of the wider strategy to put pressure on the opposition and any dissent that could sort of arise out of this.
Yeah, let's leave smallest chance that that these attacks have been directed by the Azerbaijani government, but most probably, as Pegasus creator state, they only provide governments with possibilities of attacks inside the countries. Okay. So most probably it's Armenian government driving attacks. Now let me add up to what Samvel Martirosyan said. He said he knows more than 100 people, but this meant until the latest days. Okay. Because this last wave, which happened during last week, was most probably even bigger than what we have ever seen before. So most probably now we have at least known infected doubled. Mostly in the state sector this time, but let's say low and mid-rank government officials. So this shows also that government does not trust them, and so they don't trust professional bureaucracy. So it's let's say matter of politics. They only trust their team members, but maybe they don't even trust their team members as well. Yeah. So what I want to say is that today general mistrust within the society is very widespread. Mistrust towards everyone. Many people, let's say, have broken relations with their friends because of their political affiliation or even political views, which is also widespread phenomenon in Armenia, especially last 2 years, but generally last 5 years. So this is also a big issue. I mean, if Turkey would like to have completely dispatched Armenian society, they got it.
Yeah, an interesting phenomenon, or basically series of news that we're sort of witness to, is all the different spy agencies that are now interested in Armenia. Most recently, Richard Moore from MI6 was visiting Armenia, and previously Armenian officials had visited and met with him. There is news that the CIA director was also in Armenia earlier this year. And when Hrant Mikaelian from the National Security Council went to the US, I believe in September, he also visited the CIA headquarters. I don't recall ever this type of news being reported on publicly and being announced. Now it's like openly being announced. What are we seeing here? It seems like the region is boiling in terms of potential sort of activity, in terms of geopolitics and spycraft. What can we deduce from all these meetings and from all this interest in Armenia?
Yeah, first of all, what we see in Armenia is that Armenia is open to any kind of spycraft, and every kind of activity from whatever friendly or enemy countries. And we've seen lots of publications on that in media, even on small cases, like for example, Azerbaijan has created a spy application and spread it through population of Kapan, for example, and many cases like this. But also you can find spies of whatever you might imagine country in Armenia, and what they do, I don't know, to be frank, and also I don't know what exactly agenda could have Pashinyan and Richard Moore when they talked. I can remember when US CIA chief came to Armenia, the very same time Narishkin from Russia was here, so most probably Armenia was a place to meet, but this time it does not seem the same. So this time it seems that Richard Moore came to meet Pashinyan himself, most probably. Most probably. So this is interesting because I hardly find any common interest between Armenia and UK, because if we look at which interests UK has in this region, this does not coincide with Armenian interests at all. So generally it is driving Iran out of this region, driving Russia out of this region, and resolving Karabakh issue to the favor of Azerbaijan. So where does it catch up with Armenian view?
Intersect, yeah.
Yeah. Now concerning Iran, we can also remember that defense ministers of UK, Turkey, Israel, and Azerbaijan have met in Ankara like 2 months ago. And what did they discuss? Most probably Iran. And this meeting was not public, but the arrivals were public, from which you can derive this information that they have met, and most probably about Iran, because at that time especially Iran was perceived as a very weak point and as a country where the regime might fail. Nowadays it's not the same, but still it's perceived as a goal for many countries, and UK is among them. Now, how does it coincide with Armenian interests? I don't know. So I don't know what was the agenda. Most probably the initiator of the meeting was Richard Moore himself, but the one thing we obviously know is that he is a lobbyist of Erdogan in the West and in UK as well, and he has been ambassador of UK in Turkey, and also he was a MI6 representative in Turkey. So he has lots of connections with Turkish officials. So somehow we can perceive this meeting as a let's say triangle UK, Turkey, Armenia, yeah. And so this might be somehow connected to Armenia-Turkey dialogue or Armenia-Azerbaijan dialogue, but of course I don't have exact details. Pashinyan says he discussed the security issues Armenia has, but how UK can resolve these issues, I don't know.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you, Hrant. Very interesting discussion, and I think we will have to wrap up. This was a collaboration between Groong and 168 Hours as part of the coverage of the blockade of Artsakh. We appreciate you listening, and for Groong, if you're a Groong listener, feel free to go to 168.am and if you're a subscriber of 168, feel free to visit podcasts.groong.org and check out the content that we have in English for you. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Thank you, Hrant.